Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. As always, we have a really great guest for you today. We got a little bit of different angle than we typically talk about here today. We have Stephen Gardner, who's host of the Stephen Gardner Show, the wildly successful YouTube channel, now with over just right about 1.5 million, I think. Isn't that right, Gary? Aren't you, or Stephen, aren't you right up to that number?
Yeah, 1.45 million.
Yeah, that's pretty salty. Look, there aren't very many people that get that kind of numbers ever. So, man, good on you for that. But that just talks to the quality of content that you have. That so many people keep coming back there, and that's actually one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you today. I've had the privilege to be on your show a few times, and certainly have enjoyed that. But you kind of cover, I think, a little bit more of or at least you cover more of the politics than we do on this channel here. And we want to talk because those things kind of have a nexus here between some of the military things that we often talk about, foreign policy, and the politics, because right now they are really clashing pretty hard when it comes to what U.S. policy is going to be, both domestically with especially the border, and internationally with both Ukraine funding, Israel funding, and potentially Taiwan funding. All those things are coming to hand. So we kind of want to get some of your insights on how some of these things are playing, and maybe what's going on behind the scenes and what we can expect to see, because that's stuff that a lot of Americans are interested in. It has a lot to do not just with our national security, but with our financial security and with our money that is going to these tax, coming from our tax money. So I want to know where that money is being spent and whether it should be spent in some of these directions or not. And we're going to unwind some of that stuff. So, but first of all, Stephen, look, just welcome to the show. We're really grateful to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I agree. What's going on with the military, money, politics, this upcoming election, they all come to a crossroad, and the American people have to decide which direction they're going to take going forward. Now, we don't fully have control of everything. There's a lot of money out there that is driving the direction of the country. But at the end of the day, one person, one vote is supposed to be the way that our democracy and our republic works. And so hopefully that will be the case. But yeah, I'm happy to dive in and go anywhere you want with this conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I just certainly agree with that. We're a big proponent of people power on this channel here too. So let's pick up this situation, especially about Ukraine funding and border funding. Those are the two of the bigger issues, because it's kind of come up. Now, it's interesting in that, look, the border issue has been an issue forever. I mean, all the way through. It really never goes away. It's kind of spiked a little bit in recent months, just because of the situation is getting even more dire in terms of, illegal crossers and whatever at the border. But I think there's some underlying reasons why it's jumping up now. Let's start back in, I believe it was the middle of December, maybe a little bit before that, when there was a big explosion when it should have been Zelensky was going to be coming to town. He was going to be trying to make a pitch to get more money. He was going to meet with some of the members of the House and the Senate. And things kind of blew up in a meeting that was supposed to be set up before his meeting with them. And it kind of turned into acrimonious. We'll pick up the story there.
Yeah. So the Senate's classified briefing on Ukraine yesterday, you were there, correct?
Yes, I was.
It devolved into a shouting match over border security. And Republicans say the meeting was a waste of time, because you guys, the Democrats, refused to even let them address border security. Now, the White House's supplemental request, as you note, includes $14 billion for border security. So did shutting down border talk at that meeting hurt the bill's chances of passing?
I frankly think that that performance at the briefing and the vote today was meant to signal that Republicans are united and firm in insisting changes in border security policy. I also think the president's supplemental showed the willingness to invest massively in border security. And we should stop with the theatrics and get to the bargaining table and close the gap between the two parties.
Now, Senator Coons there is saying, look, hey, if the borders are your issue, President Biden's willing to work with you, and there's like $14 billion worth going in here. But then you look over in the House side, and the new Speaker of the House says it's not actually just about money.
I have asked the White House since the day that I was handed the gavel as Speaker for clarity. We need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient. They have not provided us the clarity and the detail that we have requested over and over since literally 24 hours after I was handed the gavel as Speaker of the House. And so what the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe, and this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration.
So you see, he's saying it's not just the money, but it's the policies. And if anybody was unsure of that, you had Democratic Senator Jayapal, who underscored just how much the policy issue is holding things up.
They are holding aid for Israel and Ukraine hostage to changes to the asylum system that would destroy the asylum system, things that they could not get done through regular order.
And then you had the leader of the House, in the House, Senate, I'm sorry, Chuck Schumer is actually saying, look, this is such an important issue. We need to put those issues of the policies aside and just focus on, well, let him speak for himself.
We have to send more aid to Ukraine to defeat Putin. We know how. This is a historic moment, as I have said. History will look back if we don't support our ally in Ukraine and regard it as a major negative turning point for the U.S. and the Western world.
Now, I could have put another clip right on after this of Lindsey Graham, who's also very much for support money for Ukraine, like an emphatic statement of it. So it kind of shows that there's some division, not just within the parties, but even within parties about how all this funding is going in. Now, my operating theory is that the reason why this is coming to an issue now, even though the border has been an issue before, is because I think that people on both sides of this recognize that the war in Ukraine is not winnable. So it's kind of a waste of sending money in there, and it's not going to make any difference. We sent 113 billion through the first 18 or so months of it. It didn't change the battlefield any. So why do I want to send more? But if I can use that to leverage from some domestic policies I have, then we'll do it. So you see, the Republicans are saying, hey, yeah, I got it. Money for Ukraine's important, which Johnson said there, Lindsey Graham says, but the border issue is their bigger issue on the voting. On the other side, you have the Democrats who say the money for Ukraine is so important, but the policy on the border for their constituency, now that they're willing to put that priority above for the money for Ukraine, because it would be not hard for them to say, all right, we'll table that for now and we'll give some money to the border as long as we get what's important is the money for Ukraine, if it was. But it looks to me like now then that has diminished in process and we're going back to domestic politics. How do you see it?
Yeah, so on the southern border, they say that they have to have this money to close the gap between Democrats and Republicans. What about just closing the gap on the actual border itself?
Right.
Former President Donald Trump, he wanted $5 billion to build this wall. They said, absolutely not. That's too much money. We've now given over $100 billion to a country that we really don't have that much loyalty to. They're not a NATO member. They were never going to beat Putin. CNN, MSNBC, ABC, everybody you just ran, they've all lied. They've been bringing on paid military men and women to lie that Ukraine is going to beat Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation army. And yet, if we don't get them more of our hard-earned tax money, history is going to look back and it's going to shame us. It's going to make us feel bad. Well, I don't feel bad. I don't need to throw more money at a war that's never going to be won. I mean, they talk about the war as if it's just getting started and that there's an opportunity to win. They are 500,000 men and women down. Almost 10 million people have fled the country. This war is falling apart, and so is their narrative about the war.
Wow, Stephen, when you put it in context like that, the first part there, it's like I said, whoa, they didn't want to give Trump $5 billion for the border wall, but we've given $113 billion so far to a lost cause over there, and they want another $60 billion. Man, that kind of puts it in stark contrast.
Yeah, well, and I just read yesterday that the Biden administration is wasting $6 million a day paying people to not work on the border wall in order to stick it to former President Donald Trump. So do you guys want a wall or do you not want a wall? Because as of right now, it looks like everything that President Biden and this White House are doing is to encourage illegal immigration and not to discourage it. But then you have, someone like Senator Coons who comes on and says, well, we have $14 billion to throw at this problem, but those darn Republicans won't do anything about it. You guys aren't doing anything about it. So, you can say all you want, but actions speak louder than words.
And speaking of words, there's lots of those to go around, even if there's not a lot of action. But really, kind of to your point here, Ben Hodges, he makes so many opportunities for us to kick around here because of the things that he says. But he says, look, it's our fault. It's not Ukraine's fault they're losing. It's our fault.
I think we are at a tipping point in this war. Clearly, Russia has failed to achieve its objectives, but it has adopted a long war strategy, attempting to convey to the West that they have endless resources by pushing in thousands of untrained troops into the meat grinder. They're willing to accept those kind of casualties for the purpose of conveying that they have endless resources. On the other hand, Ukraine has taken back half of what they lost to Russia in the initial invasion, or at least from February last year, but they have not been able to achieve the decisive effects that they need to actually win this conflict. This is not a Ukrainian failure. This is a failure of the West.
Yeah, I mean, it's our fault. Just a few more missiles, Stephen, just a few more bombs, and bam, this thing will get turned around. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that Lieutenant General Hodge is most likely paid to come on and talk about his opinion, which means he's also pushed in a certain direction to keep the narrative that the White House needs. We have spent over $100 billion. They want another $60 billion. You can throw all the money that you want at this. Most of it isn't even reaching the front lines. The American people have been lied to. They say that this money is going to fight Putin. No, it's not. Most of the money is going to pay the pension of Ukrainian government workers, teachers, policemen, firemen, government. It's being taken up in bribes. Suddenly people are getting mansions in other countries. They're driving nicer cars. Where is our money going? Even Congress doesn't know where American taxpayer money's going, and they don't want to know.
Yeah, and of course, then we also have, I don't know if we have this one handy, but you have Secretary of State Blinken.
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. So in many ways, this is a win-win for us.
So, yeah, I mean, I still just shake my head at that he said that out loud, that, yeah, it's a win-win, man. War is cool. It's good for business. Even though it's not going to help them win, it's a win for us because it gets jobs and it keeps the defense industry rolling.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show you one symbol that sums this whole thing up. We give money to the military-industrial complex, and they give us money to stay in power. And then they give us money, we give them money. It just goes back and forth. It's a revolving door to get more money. And you know what? Republican Senator Mitch McConnell said it better than Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He said, don't worry, we're not really sending this money to Ukraine. We're sending it to military contractors in America. Boom. You just told us exactly what the money laundering scheme is, and we're on to you. And now Mitch McConnell is going to go back to them and say, we got you guys tens of billions of dollars. Where's my campaign donation so that I can stay in power so that next year I can get you more money?
And of course, they'll be happy to do it. He'll definitely get those additional. So the whole thing, as you say, it just keeps rolling on there. But, interesting thing. So you have like that elite class, financial and political, that like actually want the war to continue on and definitely benefit from it here. But who doesn't want war, Stephen? You don't want war. The people don't want war. Look at this Quinnipiac poll from, I guess, a month or so ago. 84% of voters are concerned that we're going to be drawn into military conflict. in the Middle East. And I bet if you run that towards, the same issue with Ukraine, I bet you're going to come into some similar numbers that people are not wanting this money to go. They don't want a war. They want things to get tied up. But what this does is that whole circular thing you're talking about, that also just kneecaps any idea that, hey, let's put some focus on diplomacy. Let's try to solve these problems. Let's try to end the conflict so that there's no more death and there's no more need to send any money overseas. But that doesn't make any cash. Nobody gets any money from that in the United States.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate. I feel like I love my country. Like, look at this flag. I love my country. My family served in the military. Yeah, there it is. Boom. But unfortunately, since about 9/11, it seems like the number one thing that the United States exports to the world is war. And you've been in war. You've led men and women in war. Nobody wants that. The American people were tired of it. We spent $9 trillion on wars in the Middle East, and we got nothing for it. Imagine if that had gone into rebuilding our country, our airports, roads, bridges, education, our children, mental health issues. The list goes on and on and on. $9 trillion would have kept us the number one country in the world. Instead, we are starting to fall behind China and other countries because our greatest export is war.
That's such a great point, man. And again, man, when you're putting those things in context and you just look at those numbers, it's just stunning. And or even that we wouldn't have had to be whatever it is, $34 trillion and flying up to continue on because money's not even real anymore. We just throw it on the credit card, believing it'll never come back on us. But look, as long as all we need is like a significant downturn in the economy, which historically always comes at some point, and all of a sudden that excessive weight, I mean, then we're going to have some real problems, and that's not going to be something you can just write a check out of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, more and more you see the BRICS nations, China, Russia, they are purposely trying to disrupt the power and the hegemony of the U.S. petrodollar. They're doing everything they can to sway Iran their direction, Saudi Arabia their direction. Here at home, we have plenty of oil and natural gas, the ability to create electricity, hydroelectric. We have empty states that could literally be filled with solar, and yet we continue to outsource our energy needs to countries that hate us, that wish ill on us, that would literally wish us evil. And so we are kind of handcuffed. We've handcuffed ourselves to groups that hate us when we have plenty of resources at home. We just don't want to tap into them.
Yeah, and it's also frustrating in that you talk about the people that hate us abroad and stuff, and we're even talking about some of our, I'm not sure you would call them allies or friends, but associates, maybe like in the Middle East or so. But you see that our you're talking about the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. These folks have been doing all kinds of shuttle diplomacy for months now, especially in the Middle East regarding the Hamas-Israel war. And they're coming back empty-handed nearly every time. And that goes everywhere from the president to Secretary of State, who's there right now and has been going around there for the last several days trying to get things done. But you see, almost never comes out because we've lost credibility among people because they do see that, like, conflict is one of your primary things. The United States no longer is one recognized as someone who seeks peace, someone who tries to resolve conflicts, but someone who tries to foster them. And look, that's not working out well for us. And you see that it's undercutting our ability to influence events. And Stephen, one of these days, and maybe not very long from now, we're going to find that the loss of our influence is as important as the loss of the potential loss of the petrodollar in terms of setting the stage. And it's going to come rolling back on top of us in ways that we can't control.
Yeah. Our mutual friend, Colonel Douglas McGregor, told me the United States used to be incredible at diplomacy, but now more and more the United States Congress hides behind the military. And so we lead out with military and force and fear tactics instead of diplomacy and education and trying to find common ground and having tolerance for countries having different government structures than us. And so if we continue to force things, they're not going to go well. I have an uncle that says, what doesn't go by force goes by violence. And I've seen that over and over again. If you try to force something, eventually it breaks down, and then violence is the only way out. And violence is never a good answer. We're looking at what's going on in the Middle East right now. We're looking at what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. It makes all of us cringe. None of us like to cover this topic. And yet, at the end of the day, there's no diplomacy going on. When's the last time President Biden even tried to reach out to Vladimir Putin? When's the last time Jens Stoltenberg of NATO tried to reach out to Putin? When's the last time they said, hey, China, you had a pretty interesting peace idea. Why don't we bring that to the table? NATO can bring in ideas, China can bring in ideas, and we'll each back that.
Yeah, but we don't. I mean, because instead, what we do is the opposite. Is that you have, I believe it was just yesterday, you had David Petraeus going out on CNN and going on the fear tactics you're talking about. Hey, look, we've only spent like $44 billion actually in Ukraine, and that's a good investment. We need to keep doing more because they can still go all the way back to the 1991 borders because we have to, because otherwise, and this is what you hear all across, they fill Americans with fear. Putin will definitely, is the word they use often, definitely go all the way into Moldova next. He'll then go into Poland. We have to stop him here for, oh my God. And so now when you hear a 4-star general saying that, and when you see some of these other retired generals or some of these like Jack Keane, Lindsey Graham are big, huge advocates for let's spread the war to Iran. We need to go there. So Petraeus is shooting over. We need to keep Russia off the plates because, my God, everybody's coming for us. That seems to be the common theme, that everybody's coming from us, from these money people you're talking about.
Yeah. I don't see any evidence for Vladimir Putin wanting to control all of Eastern or Western Europe. He wants to trade with them. He wants to sell Germany natural gas, but what do? We secretly blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. He wants to sell his food through the Black Sea. They try to stop him there. He was even okay with Ukraine competing as one of the largest grain producers in the world. And yet now look who's moving in after it's been decimated. BlackRock, Blackstone, they're all going to go in. And so America's going to put up $100 billion of taxpayer money, and then BlackRock and the people that really run the United States and the world governments, they're going to step in and make trillions of dollars off of Ukraine. And who cares about Ukraine? That's what they say. It's just more bodies that are in the way of us getting to what we really want, which is corporate profits.
And you're talking about the consequence of that is so many people. That's one of the things that's so anguishing about this to me. And we'll look at the Ukraine situation first of all. This war could have been prevented from coming out entirely. We had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on here who talked about that. The Minsk Accords could have been done, but as I'm sure you probably covered on your show, you had Western leaders that never intended for the Minsk Accords to be followed. They just wanted it to buy time for the Ukraine army. The war could have been averted in December of 2021. It could have been stopped in February or April of 2022, and on and on and on. And every time there's an opportunity for an off ramp, that something gets thrown in the mix to fill it back up and fill people with more fear. And even now, when you see that the war can't be won, or when most people should see it, instead of saying, okay, it's pointless to keep going on here. It's pointless to give another $60 billion to Ukraine so that they can just continue the war on for another year without result, except that another several 100,000 Ukrainian people will die for nothing, because at the end of the day, they definitely aren't going to change the calculus next year when they couldn't do it this past year when they had everything that the West could give them. And now that we don't have that stuff to give. So you see all these people paying with their lives for this corporate greed, if you want to say that. And they can tell themselves whatever they want, Stephen, but the bottom line is the war can't be won. I don't care how many missiles and bombs and dollars you send them.
Yeah, that footage that you were just showing, that looks like the footage for my son's video game. a war game. And yet I'm very conscious of the fact that those are human beings. Those are men and women in that cold, muddy trench. I mean, you see the blood on the rifle scope. It's a humanitarian crisis, and nobody wants to admit it because they don't want to lose. They don't want to admit that the United States doesn't have the ability to support Ukraine thousands of miles away, that most NATO nations don't have the ability to support Ukraine hundreds or thousands of miles away. This is a war that will not be won. It's not going to be won in Ukraine, and it's certainly not going to be won in Russia. Nobody goes into Russia and wins. And when we start looking at Russia as somebody that we can trade with and respect for their form of government, whether we agree with it or not, it was President Kennedy who said, we have to learn to live with Russia, even though they have a government different than our own. You're not going to control Vladimir Putin. But if you try to, you're going to end up with 500,000 people dead and 10 million running for their lives, trying to figure out, how do I learn Polish? How do I learn Romanian? How do I live in Moldova? How do I live in Germany? I mean, it's an absolute catastrophe. It's now a humanitarian crisis. And until they see it through that lens, they're just going to keep throwing bullets and bodies at Vladimir Putin.
Now, tell me this: what do you think is going to be the situation here now in the near term? Because we got a big deadline coming up with to trying to fund our government to try to keep it from getting shut down again, and that tied into that is probably going to be some kind of a deal in terms of funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan. We'll talk about those other two separately, but in terms of the money for Taiwan, for Ukraine, because the Republicans want to tie it to border fundamental changes, not just money, but also policy changes, which the Democrats don't want to do. What are the chances, do you think, that the Congress won't come up to a compromise and they won't fund any money at all to Ukraine? Or do you think that they will? And if so, to what level do you think? How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, I see it two ways. One, they're either going to compromise and they're going to do something on the border so that they can get money to Ukraine, so that they can brag about it to get reelected. If they don't get the money, then there's already talks about taking the $300 billion that the United States has stolen through sanctions and giving that to Ukraine. Now, Colonel Davis, you think that's not going to irritate Vladimir Putin? Wait a minute, you're giving our stolen $300 billion to our enemy? We have no other choice. We're going to have to bomb our enemy even more. So I don't see a clear, deathless way out of this. It's just going to be more and more bloodshed.
And the issue though is for Ukraine, it's not money, it's men that is going to be determined with the war. And a lot of people want to say, hey, we just need to give them more money and more machines, but it's not either one of those. Those are both necessary components, but they're only useful if you have the manpower component. And right now, Ukraine doesn't have it. They're not going to get it. There was a report out by, I believe it was a retired government official for Ukraine last week that said, look, of the 220,000 active forces we had on February 2022, almost all of them are dead or wounded or incapacitated. So that means that all the people they have now are new people that don't have experience beyond 1 or 2 years. They're trying to mobilize another 500,000 who don't even want to fight and are terrified that they're being stolen off the streets. So you know what kind of material that's going to be on the ground, no matter what kind of equipment you put in their hands. So the bottom line is, even if they take this money that's would violate every international agreement that there is, and they give it to them, it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to change the outcome, because even if they got the cash, what are they going to buy with it? They're going to buy some tanks and some airplanes and some artillery pieces and shells. They don't exist, man. They can't just be bought. Ergo, every way you look at this, you talk about the circular thing with the funding and the government. There's a circular thing here that every way you want to turn, it's more Ukrainian people dead, no change in the outcome.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that the American people need to be aware of is every time the government prints more money or digitally invents more money, there's no bodies to give it to in Ukraine. What are they going to do? Throw money at the problem? Oh, Vladimir Putin, take that. Here's some Benjamins that you could
throw
throw.
some quarters at him. Maybe at least that'll hurt him.
Yeah, you could literally and figuratively throw money at this Russian problem, and it's not going to solve it. Back at home, every time they print more money, the cost of your groceries goes up, the cost of your car, the cost of your haircut. If you inflate the money, everything gets more expensive. That's the definition of inflation. We have too much money chasing too few goods. And so when they say, don't worry, we're not really sending that money to Ukraine, we're dumping it all back in America. Well, no wonder it's getting so damn expensive to live in America.
Right. Yeah. And, but you know what? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that solution is to this, Stephen, because I mean, the issue is we actually had Jason Beardsley on earlier today talking about how, the American people, the one lever they have is voting. And if they can vote some of these guys out and put some pressure on them, that might change some of the dynamics. But, they got to have somebody quality to go to that won't play that game. And I don't know how we solve that problem.
Well, I don't know that Joe Biden's ego is going to get out of the way. He wants to be a wartime president that didn't lose any American troops with boots on the ground. At the same time, he's losing this war, which means that the world increasingly sees him as a weak president, which he is. So I'm not saying Donald Trump is the answer. I'm not saying RFK Jr. is the answer. You're going to have to make your own decision and vote your conscience. But I'm telling you, those two men who are the front runners against Biden, they would handle Vladimir Putin and this war situation completely differently. That I can promise you.
Yeah. And I think that Biden, talking about politics, is kind of painting himself into a corner here on two separate fronts. On the Israeli Hamas war, he's angering lots of his Arab people in key states that he's going to need, and the young people across the board, because of how he's handling the Palestinian problem and the Palestinian issue there and how he's not taking care of them. But then if he starts to move in that direction, then he gets the Israeli supporters who have lots of money. They're angry if he doesn't go enough in the other direction. And so he can't make both of those happy. At the same time, he's got this issue with the Ukraine war that it's not going the way he said it is. Even if he gets the money, it's not going to change the outcome. And so the closer it gets to election time, if the Ukraine army actually does buckle at some point, and it's certainly possible that could be the case, then it's going to look like you've got a loss on your hands. You have the Afghanistan withdrawal, which will be brought back up again for how badly that was conducted. And you have the issue with the Israeli-Hamas war that's not going well, because Israel's not going to win that war, my friend. No matter how they want to conduct the operation, they're not going to win because they're creating more trouble for themselves than they're ever solving. Every way you want to look at it, Biden's in trouble. So the best thing he can do is to do the right thing for the American people and at least limit the damage. But I think you're right. I think his arrogance and hubris is just not going to allow him to do that. And lots of people are going to pay the price for it.
Yeah. I was going to save this for my own show, but Colonel Davis, do you mind if I break a big story on your show?
Break it.
Okay. So over on Semaphore News, reporter Ben Smith has just broken a big story. Here's what it says. Biden's re-election campaign has begun organizing a series of off-the-record trips for top political reporters and editors to meet at his headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware. So they're inviting all of the press to come in to Biden's headquarters for his re-election. It says during the meeting with reporting outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, and others, they have a spreadsheet of what it will take to get Biden on their show. So he's going to bribe them. I'm going to give you more access to me, but you have to follow my rules. Number one, you have to start making me look better. Number two, you've got to make it look like I'm winning these wars, including how I was a genius that got us out of Afghanistan. But then it says that they also express that they're chafed over some of the coverage of former President Donald Trump and feel that they're giving him too much airtime. And it would be nice if they would pay more attention to his incendiary statements so that it will throw him off the campaign trail. And then it says in the coming days, We'll have political reporting teams from ABC, NBC, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, NPR, Reuters, Bloomberg, and others. They're literally rigging the game. They're saying,
I'm sorry, who's breaking this?
This is Semaphore News.
Oh.
Semaphore News reporter Ben Smith. They're having these secret meetings where they're basically saying, listen, if you want President Biden to come on your show to get ratings, to sell more advertising, he will come, but you have to do two things. You have to make him look good, and you have to talk about Donald Trump less. I mean,
do you think they'll do it? Do you think, I mean, he's trying to do that, but you think that'll succeed?
Oh, of course they're going to. The left-leaning media has way bigger of a footprint in the United States than right-leaning media. But even Fox News is being invited to these off-the-radar meetings or off-the-record trips to Delaware. So what we're about to see is look how much free media Donald Trump is getting, and they're about to shift all of that over to Biden. And if something isn't talked about, then it doesn't exist in the media, right? That's exactly how they get these stories to go away. So they're going to continue to prop him up as this great wartime president. They're going to say that he had the courage to get us out of Afghanistan, even with the outcome. They're going to say, look at how much he supported Ukraine, how he's beating Putin, how he's keeping democracy around the world safe. They're not going to talk about all of the negative things that he's got going against him.
Well, here's the thing about that, though. Shows like yours, shows like ours, and hundreds of others that are out there that now and that are not controlled by anybody's corporation, and American people, they're not going to fall for this. If those outlets actually start doing that stuff, people see with their own eyes, man. You saw that Quinnipiac poll a minute ago. They're already seeing through it. And if they try to do that, that's a danger for the media too, because if they go that far, people can see with their eyes that this stuff is not accurate. So that could boomerang, and I'll be interested in seeing if they actually do it. But I'm glad that got exposed, and I'd like to hear more from the Washington Post, New York Times, Fox News, CBS, all these people who are on that invite list. I want to see if they come clean on it.
Yeah. Well, Biden has the lowest approval rating of any president at this given time. I mean, even Donald Trump at this time was dealing with an impeachment, and he was more popular than Biden.
Yikes.
I mean, people are, the Democrats keep saying, and I don't mean to make this political, but Democrats keep saying that we are focusing on kitchen table issues. Well, guess what? Those are the big issues. It's become so expensive to live in America. Groceries are up, gasoline, it's all more expensive, housing, everything. And but they're going to try to spin this war situation. You watch. They're going to try to pitch him as the only president that had courage to get out of Afghanistan, the only president that had courage to stand up to Vladimir Putin, the only one who backed Israel while still giving lots of humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine. They're going to try to spin this, and we're already seeing these off the record trips on how to prop up this failing president.
They may attempt to do that, but the thing is that, like I've discovered in many conflicts I've been involved with and studied, the enemy has a vote, and Putin may not play that role that he's supposed to allow that fiction to be passed. And certainly the situation descending in the Middle East could explode and expand beyond. And that's not going to fit anybody's reelection narrative. So we'll be interested in seeing that his. And thank you so much for breaking that on here, and something we're all going to be very keen to continue to watch the days ahead. And we will leave it there for the moment, but continue to follow this. And you guys need to follow Stephen Gardner on his show, where I'm sure going to be talking a lot more about this in the coming days. Y'all tune into his show and watch that. And we'll be doing the same thing, because I know he's got some good episodes coming up. Thanks for coming on our show today, Stephen.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Everybody should, if you're watching this right now, subscribe to Colonel Davis. He comes on my show and gives incredible insight. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for that too. We look forward to being on your show one of these days soon. And thank you guys for coming in and watching our show today. We remain unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth that you need, all the truth, whatever it happens to be and wherever it leads. You're going to get it right here. Thank you very much. And we will see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.